All right, so the system we're going to talk about today, or the systems, are the circulatory and lymphatic systems, two systems that work interchangeably. So the circulatory system, if you remember, circulates blood in particular that carries oxygen and other nutrients to all the cells of your body. And then as your cells are going through cellular respiration, consuming that oxygen and releasing CO2, which is waste, along with other types of waste, it carries them away. So basically what it does in a nutshell is it brings to the cells oxygen and nutrients, swaps them for CO2 and waste, and it carries that CO2 and waste away. All right. And ultimately this is all powered by the heart. All right. Again, made entirely of cardiac muscle, very strong muscle, mind you. All right. So in a nutshell, this is how blood travels through your body. All right. So it starts really in the lungs. So the lungs add oxygen to the blood. Right, it breathes in oxygen. And then it travels a very short distance to your heart. It's oxygen-rich blood that enters the upper half of the heart, and then it pumps that oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body, every inch of your body, from your head to your toes, your fingers, you name it. And again, as we mentioned before, these cells swap out the oxygen for CO2 and other waste, and now it carries CO2-rich blood back to your heart, all right, where it basically just pumps it from there to your lungs, where, as we'll learn eventually, the CO2 is swapped for oxygen, and this process is repeated over and over and over again. All right. Give or take, they say it takes about a minute or so for a drop of blood to travel from the heart back to the heart. So from the heart to the cells, swaps the oxygen for the CO2, and the CO2 is pumped back to the heart, where it is pumped to the lungs, where that exchange occurs, and the process starts all over. So a couple pieces about the anatomy of the heart. The upper half is called the atrium. All right, and the atrium is the upper half of the heart, but it also is where blood enters the heart. Not to be confused with the ventricle. The ventricle is that lower, very muscular portion of the heart, and that is where blood is pumped out. So, albeit your classic heart doesn't really look like a real heart, but if you think about like your little adorable hearts that you may draw, that bottom V, remember as being like the ventricle, all right, the bottom part, all right, if you can remember the atrium is the top part, or the A points up, something to remember there. But again, atrium is the upper half where blood enters, and the ventricle is the lower half where blood leaves. All right, so this is in a nutshell what happens. So we're not going to go over these in too much detail, but these are the blood vessels of the lungs that, if you notice, pump oxygen-rich blood back to the heart, where it pumps that oxygen-rich blood to the head and to the lower parts of the body. But as they travel, they're exchanged with CO2-rich blood that enters the upper half, and then that CO2-rich blood is pumped back to the lungs, where the process continues over and over and over again. All right, so this is the upper half, the atrium. This is the lower half, the ventricle, the very muscular ventricle. It's actually where most of the pumping is happening. All right, now there's three types of blood vessels. So if you get queasy about blood, I don't know how you're going to handle this, but I'll do my best to try to not make it too queasy for you. But arteries are any blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart. So this is when the scientists named everything. The arteries are, believe it or not, connected to the ventricle. All right, so they carrying blood away from the heart. And then the veins, starting with V, carry blood back to the heart, going into the artery, or the atrium rather. But hey, I didn't name it. So again, in this picture here, these two arrows here would represent the arteries leaving the ventricle, and these two here would represent the veins entering the heart, whether the blood is coming from the lungs or coming back from the cells. It travels to the heart via veins. Now, very important is the in-between that exists between the arteries and the veins, and that's the capillaries. And the capillaries are very small, so like for instance, this would be an artery, but basically what happens is it branches off. It's kind of like roads. You branch off from a highway to a main road to a well-driven road, all the way to the back roads, and all of a sudden you're in the small back roads, right? So what happens is it breaks off into these smaller and smaller blood vessels, some so thin that it's only a blood cell at a time can pass through, but they extend from the arteries, and they're so thin that this is where the oxygen in the cells is received, and then it's swapped for the CO2 that's been built up in the cells. Very thin membranes that exist in the capillaries, and this is where that oxygen and CO2 exchange takes place. But what happens after this is they funnel themselves back into larger and larger vessels and eventually back into the veins where that blood, now low in oxygen, travels back to the heart. All right, now let's talk about blood itself. All right, blood is, give or take, it's not a pure substance. It's only about 45% red blood cells. The rest, roughly the rest of it, is what's called plasma, which is kind of like a liquid. So this is blood. If you were to spin blood, you would see, whoops, sorry about that. You would see that most of the, you see a lot of, these are red blood cells, but this is all the liquid medium that makes blood a liquid. All right. All right, so go back here. So there is a thin 1-ish% of other things like white blood cells and cholesterol and such that exist, platelets, but most of it is red blood cells and plasma. And basically what it does is it transports materials throughout the body. That's really what blood is all about. It clots wounds, so if there's ever a cut, the platelets in particular clot the wounds. And there's also a material that exchanges in the bloodstream called lymph. All right, so for all you Harry Potter fans, maybe you get that. So lymph is part of its own system. It's got its own little circulatory system in itself, I guess you can say, but it's called lymphatic. The lymphatic system with its own little lymphatic vessels and lymphatic ducts. And this lymph material, all right, is transported throughout the body, and it assists in transporting nutrients to the organs, so it helps the blood. But it also helps filter out toxins, bacteria, for instance. All right, so this is a picture of a girl with swollen lymph nodes. So there's probably some kind of bacteria or something like that got into her blood. And it happens. And the lymph nodes are fighting the bacteria, which causes them to temporarily swell. Then there's also your kidneys. So your kidneys play an important role because basically what they do is they remove excess water from your blood. So it's actually bad to have too much water in your blood. And basically, if you can see where this is going, so they remove excess water. They keep the water balance where it needs to be. But it also removes this other material that called urea, which is created in certain nitrogen reactions in the body, and it is toxic. So it helps get rid of the urea, which often gives the material collected a yellowish color. You see where this is going. And basically what it does is it passes the waste, the water mixed with urea, i.e. urine, which does include other things, mind you, to the bladder where it stores until you are ready to let go in the form of urination. All right, so that water is basically water that your body wants to get rid of because it has too much. All right, and a similar role in your circulatory lymphatic system is your liver. So it's there, it's the largest internal organ of the body. It contains enzymes that break down toxins in the body. So blood is constantly flowing through your liver, and your liver has enzymes in it like catalase, if you remember that breaks down toxins and makes the blood clean to some degree. And it also does help add certain proteins to the blood, certain reactions that are happening in the liver that adds proteins to the blood. And it also does assist in cleaning the blood of bacteria, keeping the blood nice and healthy and bacteria free.